Okay, we are back. My apologies. I had my computer hiccuped, but we are good. So here we are. We were talking about the creation of this menu. I've got the flat menu. I've got the text at the same angle. We are on the local transform frame, which means that if we grab a hold of this text object and we hold down shift, we will pull it directly in 90 degrees to the object. We just turned off shadows. We just turned off on this text on its options. We just got rid of cast shadows. We made it black. Let's change the name to an actual title. So we're going to go to text shape. Under text is where that lives. Under mesh model, text shape, text. Let's call this actions. So this will be like the title for our menu. We can actually now hold down Alt and Shift, and since we're using the local transform frame, anything that we drag along this plane when we clone it off, it'll move straight down our panel. And then we now have maybe 3 button options. We can actually delete one of those, and we'll just work with one of them. And if we select the two bottom ones that we made, we can now, since they're the same, we can kind of group edit some of their properties. So if we click on text shape, we can actually unpack font and then bring the size down. And now they're getting to be kind of more like subheading size. And we can also change the... Looks like I've got another text entity in here. Who's this one? Oh, strange. We're going to call this, since this is my box, we'll call this UI panel. I'm going to title it that. I'm going to title this one title, or UI panel, and we'll call it UI title. And then we'll call this button 1 title. We'll probably put a button underneath this. Button 2 title. And yeah, so now we just need to create the buttons. And what we're going to end up doing is packaging this all into one. All of these will become children of this panel. So let's go ahead and do that now. And the way we do that is multi-select, holding down shift, select the bottom, shift hit the top, grab on the words, and scroll over UI panel. Now they come underneath UI panel, and UI panel has got this little expander button. So now we've got children of UI panel, which means that if I move the UI panel, all of these things go with it. Let's change actually action. Let's say we'll just, for the time being, we'll probably come back and change this on button 1. Instead of it saying text, we'll call it button 1. And on button 2, again, this isn't the title of button 2. This is the actual text that gets displayed, and that's under text shape. Just always something to remember. You might forget that. And it makes sense to call it that because it's like what it is and what it displays is sometimes different. And it's kind of important. In here, you want to talk about it as part of the assembly, that it's, what it's actually creating. That's the button 2. It's the button 2 title. That's the name of this object. But the text that it actually displays might not be the words that you want to organize it by hierarchically. So it's important to have those 2 different names, but just remember the words it displays is under mesh model text shape text. And you'll need to know that when you dynamically change the words that are displayed in script. Okay, so we've got kind of like a basic looking panel here. When we press play, it stays in the air because we have no rigid body on any of the objects here, and this top level UI panel doesn't have a rigid body. So what we're going to do is put 2 little rectangles in here. that will become button 1 and button 2. So the way this is going to work is we're going to go to Entity Plane, and when we draw onto this box, just like when we drew actions, it'll draw planar to the the UI panel, this background. And you'll notice this flickering. That's because these items are at the exact same depth, and computers kind of struggle to render to know exactly who's on top and who's just behind it. So what's important to do is just give this just an ever so slight push into the forward dimension, and then you'll stop getting that flickering. So button 1 will be just slightly out from the UI panel. And now, since we drew 1 and we're on local transform, we can Alt, Shift, and drag along this plane to bring it down onto button 2. If we weren't in the local transform, and here's a great example, and we went to Alt, Shift, and drag, I get this action. You can see it moving along. This is the absolute world up direction, or the world forward and back direction here. I'm not sure if that's X or Z, but you get your Y and an X or a Z, which is useful maybe, but we wanted to just take the button 1 and clone it down to the button 2. So since we're on this angle, if I hit L, I get this transform frame that's set to local, and I can just drag the item along the plane of the UI. So that's the local context again. So these buttons now, they need to become children of the UI panel as well. But first what we want to do is remove their rigid bodies as well. Every item is drawn ready to speak to the physics engine, but we're going to take away its ability to do that. And we'll just call this button 1 outline will be fine. Button 2 outline. And it's these buttons then, these are the ones that are going to have our interactions on them. So let's get them to be underneath the UI panel as children. You'll notice now that they're children, that you can move them around. In fact, I actually want the children, I want the text of button 1, the button 1 title, I want it to be a child of button 1 outline. And I want the text of the button 2 title to be a child of the button 2 outline. Which is great because it now means that if I move button 2, the button 2 outline, if I move the button 2 outline, button 2 and its text goes with it, and I move button 1, so then I can just sort of move these around like this, where I could say, yeah, I want this one to go side by side. So anyway, so I've got kind of like where they were at first. So button 1 and button 2 will look like this. I'm going to change the color of button 2, the outline to, we'll do like a blue, do a light blue. And button 1, we'll do a light green. And we're pretty much set. To make these things buttons, I basically need to do a couple of things. The first is just to make it interactable. So what I'm going to do is select button 1, come up to its property on its top level, this little triangle. We're going to add the interactable attribute, which now gives us the press event, the on press, when we press it with either the laser in VR or the mouse cursor in like a 2D screen space. So I'm going to instantiate an on press event, which means we now have a event function where we're going to be able to write a script to do something in this world. And then I'm going to do the same thing for button 2. So for button 2, I come up here, I'm going to add the interactable, select the interactable, and select on press. This is great. So now button 2 and button 1 each have a the place where they're ready to be pressed and create something. So we have some code inside of these ones. So these buttons are already. So if I look at the blue button, for example, the blue button already has a little script that sets the time of day to 22 hours, 10 o'clock. Is it 10 o'clock? Yeah, it's 10 o'clock. Let's see here. We've got, these things which make something appear and disappear. So why don't we use this panel to do make appear and disappear. So I'm just going to copy this code off of the red button. And we're not going to change the label. Here, the first part of this is where we find the two objects that we want to fade in, and then the second part, we change their properties that allow them to fade in. So I'm going to copy just this. I don't really care about this part. That changes this text, which is fine, but it's cool, but I'm going to kind of stay away from it for now. So this will be button 1. So we're going to make this stuff that's right here, these flowers, appear when we press button 1. So button 1, if we right-click button 1 and hit edit code now, it comes back to our on-press event. We could also click on button 1, come up to the interactable, go to the on-press event. And in here I'm going to paste that code, which it already works. We've confirmed it over there. So now when I press button 1, I see this stuff kind of fade in over here. And those are some flowers I probably spent 15 seconds creating in Tilt Brush, and some text. So that's how button 1 works, and you would do the same for button 2. We can make those things fade away. I'll just follow the logic. And, in all of the other tutorials, you'll have plenty of scripts to work with. We're not going to focus so much on the scripts now as much as what it takes to kind of the logic behind building one of these UI panels. So let's take a look. So what are we talking about? This is the red-gray group. On the gray button, that's the disappear button. I'm going to right-click and hit edit code. I'm going to grab the top 4, copy those. I think it's always good to help, show people that it's possible to just cut and paste, because yes, you will have to be conscientious that the things that you're cutting and pasting are going to work, and in this case they can, because this was all set up in the same show and all of that. So, but yeah, cutting and pasting can make your life pretty easy. So on the button 2 outline, it's got this little symbol for the code here. We right click and hit edit code. I can just paste right in there, clean that up. And when we press play, button 2 shouldn't really do anything until button 1 has made things appear, and button 2 lets them disappear. So any of the things that we've learned so far can be packaged onto these UI panels. What's cool is that in essence I can clone this out and it's still going to work. So I can have multiple, say for example, I could just sort of make a big list of items and they could live, I'm on local transform, so when I thought I was going to push it away, I pushed it kind of down diagonally into the earth. So what I want to do is hit L. So now I'm in the world transform frame. Now I can push this away along the ground plane. So that's something to be conscientious of when you're working in a space like this. On this diagonal thing, local is your best friend, and then all of a sudden you want to move something on the world frame. Local's no longer your friend, so that's why toggling with L will toggle from local to world, world to local. And in that case, I wanted world because I wanted it to slide along the path. So now I've got basically 2 of these, what I'll call kind of kiosk or billboard kind of UI panels that have buttons on them, and you can see that stuff happening in the background. And if I go into VR, if I put a VR, the preset rig in the space, and jump into VR, turn my controllers on here. Hope everything will wake up nicely. I can head over here. Oops. I can fly over here, and from this vantage point, I can work with the buttons, right? And same thing over here. So you could position menu items all around your world like this. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to show you one more thing about kind of the local transform on this, when you're building a panel, that might be helpful. I'll also show you some of the things we've got from the stamp, like a little packaged expand and glow hover event. So let's hit stop. And let me get this VR rig somewhere useful. Bring it over here. So we have some stuff that's baked into interactions, which might be useful. And they're at the very bottom. It's expand hover and glow hover. And these are baked in interactions that you can place on an object. That if it doesn't have a rigid body, you can do expand. And if it has, I think if it has a rigid body, it'll go ahead and glow. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So if you wanted to show that you're hovered over and ready to select this and that it's an option from an interaction standpoint, here's some basics that you can tinker with. Let's do expand on green, and we'll do glow hover on blue. So that's expand hover on green and glow hover on blue. And what I've just put onto these, onto this UI panel, onto the button outlines, should be here. So on button 1 outline, you see this thing that says expand, and on button 2 outline, I'm gonna get rid of this other UI panel. That was confusing me. I now have this node that is just a little code, a little script node. One that's called expand and one that's called glow. Let's take a look at glow. I'm gonna hit edit code, and this just this gets read all the way up the hierarchy, all the way to this object. And so basically, when we hover on to the object, we're going to animate its color property. To basically multiply the color, and that's the equivalent of glow. Basically multiplying the color pushes it into a range where its HDR creates glow. And we ramp that over a time period of 0.1 seconds, and we ramp that down over a time period of 0.1 seconds. So we can take a look at glow. I'm going to reset my, so there we go, we're glowing as if we want to be selected. And so I kind of like having those items on there. What does expand do? Expand does a similar thing. Expand is uses an elastic ease in interpolation on the transform property. This is, everything here is the equivalent of an animation that happens over a time scale. We add a scale key to the local scale, and then we change it. So we can go into this more in another time, but basically it has the output of scaling the object like this, and you can see that since it's changing the scale, it makes the actual text go with it. So the text wouldn't necessarily have to be on the button, and the button could actually be the button square, which I called the outline, wouldn't necessarily have to be the parent either. So you could, for example, on button 1, so the button 1 outline, the button 1 title could be the parent. And now, oops, that doesn't seem right. Excuse me here. I'm going to remove expand for a second. Button 1 title. When the button here is, when the title and the outline are not childed to one another, if I put onto the outline the interaction expand hover, now I get just the outline. I think it's important to get rid of put the expand on once you have it in the right place. So in the last case, the button title was a child of the button outline, and the words got bigger when I scrolled over them, which might be what I want. And in this case, maybe I want it to be more like this. This one is glowing. The button 2 situation is glowing. One of the things that I have sometimes done with the glow is, you'll see when I edit it, that it's actually on hover on and on hover off. And what I've done in the past is actually just change this to an on press. And I think this works. Change this to an on release. Which means that you can see. So what I could actually do, as an example, if button 2 on an interaction gets an expandable hover. So now button 2 will expand, and it's doing the 1 because the text is a child of it. The text goes with it. It looks like a button that I'm used to, where I scroll over it and it's like, oh hey, I'm a button, I'm ready to be pressed. And then when I press it, as I press it, first of all I have to put something in the space. This will make the stuff disappear. When I press it, it's bright while I'm pressing it, and then it's dark when it goes off. And that was just the changing of the glow code. I changed from on hover on to on press, and I changed on hover off to on release, which means that when I click it, I get this little ramping up animation of the color property, which is the equivalent of the glowing, and then when I release the button, I get this ramping down. So those are all options for you to tinker with, but what's important to know is that on any of your buttons, and we did this in our first lesson that we did here on day 2, our first kind of interaction button tutorial. It's just important to know that on any of the time you put an interactable attribute on one of these objects, you have available to you all of these little events that take place in the interaction. So these are the main ones, right? When your laser or your cursor begin to intersect that object, that's when the hover on takes place. When they stop hovering, that's when you've hovered off. And so these are key for sort of saying, showing, hey, that expanding is happening. It's expanded up once I've hovered on, and it waits until I hover off. And only once I've hovered off does it stop expanding. So you can do a lot of different things with your own hover-ons and your own hover-offs. And with your presses and releases. In fact, see here. We should be able to see this. There, you can actually see them firing. These will turn pink because I'm actually looking at the events that are connected to this button outline. So when I hover on, you'll see this turn pink, and when I hover off, you'll see that turn pink. That means they're firing. Hovering on, hovering off. And if I do that on the button 2, you see that as well. But you'll need to see on the glow for the press and release, press and release, press and release. So you have press, release. To do something on press and end it on and undo it on release is kind of the equivalent of doing something on pressing, except you do it once and then you undo it once. And whereas on pressing, you do it every frame while you're pressing. So those are, those are the kind of things that can give you a lot of capabilities in sort of building some interaction design. Maybe I want actually a new option to appear right next to here when I hover, only when I hover. Or say, for example, I've got little, instead of expanding or glowing, I've got little help text that shows up when I scroll over this. You could do that. Just like this code inherently makes this text appear over here, we could do the same thing to text, right here. In fact, it will not take me but like a couple seconds to demonstrate that. So the button 1 title, I'm going to go back to local transform. I'm going to make some help text. I'm going to take this text, I'm going to make its size a little smaller. I'm going to bring it right underneath. I'm going to make its color like gray or something. And I'm going to say Okay, so I am help text only when you hover. And so when I hover over the button 1 UI, the button 1 outline, so button 1 outline hover, so on its hover event, so on interactable, on hover on, I'm going to get this text to show, and when I hover off, I'm going to get that text to go away. So by default, that text, the help text that's in here, let me select it. We need to get this copy, button 1 text copy, so we'll call this help text. So help text needs to be invisible. Help text needs to be invisible when we start, and then help text needs to be made visible when we hover over button 1 outline. And then help text needs to be invisible when button 1 is hovered off. And so what we're going to do is go to the button 1 outline, to its interactable, to its hover on event, and we're going to go, we need to get a hold of the help text, so we're going to grab help text and bring it into our script. So we just dragged help text on in, and we're basically going to say help text colon fade in. And now when we press play, I am help text only when you hover. And I'm going to have the help text fade out when we hover off. So we have a hover on. We could just copy this and create and change that word to hover on, but you should be in the habit of either that or coming to the interactable and generating a hover off event right here. And so I'll just copy this, and what I'm going to say here is instead of fade in, I'm going to say fade out and deactivate. So there you go. Now you get that. You now have kind of that effect of, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, our fade in allows you to specify a time frame that you want things to fade in. But I think it needs to be, I'll have to get back to you on that. I think you have to put it in as a time value, like 2 seconds. I think it would be this. I will get back to you on that. But that's pretty cool. Simple way to just get stuff fading in, fading out, fading in, fading out. So yeah, we're getting a straight. So on this one, on the one, just as a recap, the top button, the green border expands. We get an expand and now on a hover here we've got the help text, and on. But the button lives kind of separate from. It's not a child. The text that says button 1: is not a child of the panel there. So it doesn't expand. But on this one here, button 2, the text is part of it, and I can see how either one would make whatever. They have just kind of a different. Example, and then on button 2 I've got an on press, we glow up, and on release we glow down. So I know that this is an option because I scroll over it, and then I know that it activated. I get that feedback from that glow. And you could also run a sound just like we do this. We could run a sound on one of these clicks as well as on the hover, right? So you could blink plonk, blink plonk, blink plonk, blink plonk as you select them, flip 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 flip, and that's one of the pieces that a lot of that you don't really hear as much about in Tilt Brush, for example. Those little actions have little animations, and there's a lot of like flip flop, flip 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 flop, and like you're flipping through kind of a flip book of options, and so you might consider audio feedback. And then the press events are like all the other press events we've been learning. The hover events, similarly. And so now we've got, this is this billboard style UI panel. And let's just think of a few more ways that we can get it to kind of interact like this. So this is volumetric. This has a rigid body. It has the grabbable interactive on it, or the interaction of grabbable fixed, and it's got a fixed rigid body. And this does not have any rigid body, which is why I'm passing through it. Unlike this speaker, or this silly, this speaker is dense. It's fascinating. Yeah, the speaker is not having my. It's also very bottom heavy. It's like a. Anyway, it's a little lighter. So we're gonna make a let's make a panel that works like this, and this one's pretty straightforward. We've done this a lot. You've probably caught it in a few other tutorials. But once we've got this panel, we should be in a good place to do all of the other things in a pretty straightforward manner. So basically, to create the thing that is movable, something that is movable in VR, let me get the VR rig. Point these in a different direction. So once we have, this guy, what we can do, we could have a clone of this. What this needs is what this top level guy needs is a rigid body. This UI panel copy, we'll call this movable. I'm gonna collapse our other one. That's the UI. This is the UI panel that's now movable. Is this one? And let's do a couple things to it. First of all, let's give it just a slightly different color. That'll be fine. And the main thing that we need to do is give it a rigid body, and we're going to set its movability, the movability of that, to false. And then we're going to add the interaction of grabbable fixed, which means that now when we press play, it'll be fixed in the air. And now that it's, since it's fixed in the air, but it's also grabbable, the mouse will grab it, which only moves it in the plane relative to the screen. But in VR, that grabbability is fundamental, because I can move it and rotate it into different positions, and I can take it over to a relevant location and work with it there. Can text not come with me? That's interesting. Yep. The text didn't come with it because the code is referencing that text. Now that we've cloned this off, we would need to write the script in a different way, so that it would get a hold of that the little text entity here. Relatively, it would need to reference. It would need to move through its parent hierarchy to kind of navigate and get back to itself. So that's why that text isn't showing up there. All these other ones reference themselves, and the self is a relative reference. But this, and I'll show you now why that text didn't come with us. That text didn't come with us because, well, actually, let's we'll look at it in this position and you'll see. This is actually a really good lesson. You'll see that when I fade over this green one over here, the text fades in over here. I can't point at it without redoing it. Here, there. This green one, this button over here references this text. But this button also, just like this one, it references this world, thing. These flowers. So pressing the green one here makes those flowers appear. Pressing the blue one here makes them disappear. Same as if I press the green one here and the blue one here, which is because they're referencing one static item. They don't dynamically reference something relative to themselves. So we can actually set it up to do that, because this object can have a relationship to this text. And I can do that so that you could actually kind of clone these away and see the help text go with them. But before we do that, you saw very much how simple it was to create now an object, to create a panel that was movable like our remote control. What we did to this plane and was add a rigid body, which, if you recall, we got rid of the rigid body to make this one, to make this first one. So if you were to make this one from scratch and you want it to be a panel that gets moved around and placed into different parts of the world, then this, you don't even have to re-add that rigid body. The key is, if you have the rigid body and you want this sign to float in air, you need to choose whether you want it to be inactive and have things pass through it ghost-like, or you want it to be movable false, which means it's fixed in air and things will collide with it, like the rocket did with my remote control earlier. And then once its rigid body is fixed or inactive, but it does have a rigid body, you need to put the interactions grabbable fixed on it. I mean, the truth is, if I click this rigid body movable set to true, our little plane here will fall to the ground. And do we care? Let's see if we care. I don't know. We can grab it and we can actually toss it around, and maybe that's exactly what we want, sort of like a tossable, menu or something. It might be nice to have it be slightly thick, because planes do not work well. They don't work that well kind of physically, because they don't understand the physics engine, and the terrain don't really know how to place them. And so what you'd want to do is have them sitting. It's better if they're going to be flopping around like this, that you have done it on a thin box. So instead of a plane that really doesn't have any dimensions, it's much better to do things with a box, right? So a thin box like this actually better represents a physical object that's going to get tossed around. This plane will occasionally get, will find itself sort of recessing into the ground. You see it sort of, sometimes its collisions with the ground can be kind of weird. So my recommendation would be to use something more like this, that as a card, some sort of like a slightly thick card or a little piece of foam board or something. That would be the object that would be your movable UI panel, let's call it. So what I did to create that, to make that thing fall to the ground, was make its rigid body from movable property set to true. I'm going to leave it back at false, which again is the behavior of our remote control from the beginning, and we can fly around and place it. And I really do kind of enjoy this, because I can actually kind of like put some options out in space and then kind of fiddle with them. So cool. So these two things basically work the same. I used volumetric, cylindrical, and they would effectively call this skeuomorphic, and I don't know if you'd call this skeuomorphic from interaction design, but this would be kind of skeuomorphic design here. I've got these sort of real looking buttons, and then here it's sort of this virtual but flat item, and these both work kind of the same. And also, if you wanted to throw this occasionally, you could put a button, just like button 1. You could have two buttons over here that are based on, a little icon that say make this thing throwable, and you would set the rigid body movable property true, and this thing would suddenly flop around, and then you could throw it and whatever. If that was, because you could imagine this thing all of a sudden, you want to change it, do things to it, which could be cool. But So I'm going to go over here and do this little side lesson on how I make this text come with this, and then the last thing I'm going to do is with a little UI, a little handheld UI panel. We'll shrink this down a little bit and see what happens when what way we might appreciate placing this along us, along our hand or whatever. We could lock one of these things to our body as well, which could be interesting. And I've done that before, and it's an interesting way to do it. So we're going to do a quick lesson on making this dynamic, and then we'll do a couple other ways that we could have this menu kind of follow us. So what happened here was this situation where we cloned our first, we just simply grabbed it and then we held down Alt and we just kind of cloned it across to make a second, this now red menu. And when I scroll over the green on this side, it doesn't give me any text here, it just gives me text over here. Well, the main reason for that is, the only reason for that is the following. Our new panel, it carried over the same, the same code, the things with the same names, but they're they are unique objects. They're different actual sort of data, entities, and they're represented in the computer differently as well. And so, when we made the little code on the hover script, and we'll take a look at it, it's referencing this specific piece of text, help text from our first menu, not this one. Also, this green one also references script text from our first one. So we need to find that text dynamically. So let's show you what I mean. So on the UI panel that is movable, let's actually we'll open up the UI panel here, and then we'll open up the UI panel that's movable, and then it's on the button 1 outline has an event that is called on hover on, and you can see right here that it has an item called help text that it fades in and fades out. Help text is being found using find object by unique ID, which finds a very specific thing in a very specific item. It finds exactly this object. This is like the social security number for this object. It doesn't find it doesn't find the text that's sitting next to me, and that ultimately is what's making the fact that when we cloned it, see right now we're in UI panel, button 1 outline, which is referencing this green section of the button of UI panel. UI panel, on UI panel, on button 1 outline, we have the same code as we have when we edit the code on button 1 outline under UI panel movable. And in it is this line. This line is the same between them, and this line has the same social security number, and that's the social security number in it. I say that with air quotes, the social security number of that help text. So we need to find that help text a different way. And so what I'm actually going to do is delete this, and I'm going to delete this. Actually, we're in. I'm gonna work on this panel. So we need to be in UI panel, button 1 outline, and edit that code. We're gonna get rid of this find by unique ID. We need to find it a different way. We're not gonna find it by unique ID, which is super helpful and easy the first time you set something up. But once you decide you might want to clone something, you need to do what I'm doing here. So we actually know that there's an item. There's an item here called help text, all caps with a space between them. And I am I'm going to get rid of the close down movable. So I'm in UI panel. Button 1 outline is where this script lives. So button 1 outline has a sibling called help text. It's on the same It's the same depth in here. It's not right now. Expand is a child of button 1 outline, but help text is just a sibling, and which means they share the parent called UI panel. So what I can do to get a sibling is get my parent node, the UI panel, and then search the children for something by name. And the way that we do that in code is as follows: help text equals self, which is in this case is the button 1 outline, and then we're going to run a function on our self, which is get parent node, and that returns to us the UI panel. So the UI panel is our parent, and it has a child called help text, and now we can run a function on that panel, find node by name, open close parentheses. Inside of those parentheses, we're going to pass in the string that is the name help text. So that's the name of my sibling, right? So this little line right here is basically, hey, I want to call something help text, and I want to start it myself, go get my parent, search its children for something called help text, find my sibling named help text, right? Cool. So when this happens, we're gonna go get that help text, and when I hover on this green text on this white menu, it's going to go and get the help text that's sitting next to me here. And when this code runs over here on this green one, and it goes and gets its parent, which is the red menu, it's going to go find a child called help text, and when it finds help text, when it goes and finds its help text, it's going to be the help text over here. So we'll show you how this works. I'm going to basically copy this line, and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to paste it again. Well, we'll go ahead and clone it. Let's make sure that it works on the white one. So there it is. It's working. Always feels good that it works. So it's working. So now what happens if I clone this? I'm just holding down Alt and shift dragging it to the side. Voila. So a lot of explanation from my part for really what's a single line of code there. Just changing the way that we find something, and that's really key, and you can that's going to be extremely helpful, especially when you want to make things that are very clonable. And you'll notice every time you go and find something by unique ID, you better be referencing something in the world if you plan to clone your thing. If you plan to clone your thing and it's something that should go with the cloning, you need to find it kind of in that relative to myself. So let's do it. And that's quite, relatives, it's quite literally like go get my parent node, go get its child, find node by name. To get my sibling, I go get my parent, get my sibling, which is the way that, so literally relatives. Keep it in the family. So there you go. So let's we've now got a clone that's basically like this. So here's one in the world. Why don't we put this one, now that we've got our opportunity? Again, this one doesn't have a rigid body. Why don't we go ahead and put this one? Let's put this one on our hand. So this one's in the world, we can move it. This one's in the world, we can't move it. And let's put this one on our hand. We'll get the background just slightly different. It's not. We'll go with like a bluish gray, whatever. Not the prettiest. I'll leave that up to you guys. So let's I think we should be okay to just scale this down. I hit R, we go to scale, which is under transform, and I'm scaling this down, and I can actually take a look at what human scale would be. If I wanted, I could bring this over. Bring this over to the origin where our little human helper size thing is. Oh, I'm in playtime here. Excuse me. Excuse me. So bring it near these humans. To get the humans to show up, I press H, and I get this human scale, which mirrors to the VR. If you don't do any scaling of the VR rig, if I don't change the scale of the VR rig, this will be 1:1, where this person's average. They're about average height, which is about 2 meters, a little less than 2 meters, 5 point something. So let's say we had a panel on our left hand. Quite literally, would I make it like her cup of coffee? So there we go. I like it how it is. There's other ways you could do this. You could pull it right next to your VR rig to get a sense, and you could also just flat out know the dimensions of your panel, and scale from there. So that was my way of doing that in kind of a fast fashion. But you could very much build your item, using using real dimensions from the beginning. So for example, your UI panel copy, we'll call this hand UI hand attached. You could quite literally, that if my scale is we're at 0.1, we could make, work the dimensions of this. So this is about 0.2 by 0.25 by 0.2 meters, which is 2.5 and by 2 decimeters, 25 centimeters, so on. So you could do that kind of a process. So either one of those makes sense. You're also seeing that these are basically the size of your hand. So you're seeing that this thing is just a little bigger than handheld. So what we're going to do is put this on our left hand now, this UI panel hand attached. And what we're going to do is place it directly onto our left hand from a child standpoint, and we're going to position it. I actually don't even know which hands these are. If I select left hand, it is in fact right here where we are. But we're going to do this another way. So we're going to take the UI panel, select it by our hands, and then pull it up and put it on our left hand. And then what we're going to do, I'll close some of these. We're just looking at the VR rig. We now have this UI panel hand attached as a child of it. And I have put it directly onto the left hand, meaning that it's going to move around. So I'll just play to kind of show you what that looks like. I did literally no positioning, and so there it is. Actually, it's really not that bad. So you can see how these controllers are oriented. My index finger is basically right here, pointing kind of straight out up the thing, and my thumb kind of points out this direction. And so this thing is a little, if I were going to hold this like a nice palette, I'd kind of want the plane being right about here. So this thing needs to kind of get into a different position with me. So let's work on positioning this panel to a place that we like it, and I'll kind of walk you through that process. If I hit escape here, I can actually make some edits while looking at it, and I can just hold my hand out here. And since we're in pause time, we're gonna actually have to use we're gonna have to commit these transform changes using commit transform changes. But we could also do this in stop time. I'll sometimes do it like this so I can see it and make the edit. So I'm looking at Basically, I've got the panel over here, and I'm going to move its local position around. And so I'm going to come to transform. First of all, like, what happens if I just zero out these rotations? Do I like that at all? Take a look. Excuse me. So I can go back into VR. I kind of like its position from a rotational standpoint. I mean, like, the way that it's facing me. I'm actually going to move it a bit more towards my thumb, I would say. And I'm going to push it forward, outward. In this case, like, towards the mountains. I'm going to bring it, if I hold it like this, I'm going to bring it down to the ground. Actually, let me hold it like this, excuse me. So up is like I'm pointing my finger up and my thumb is going to the right side. I'm going to push the panel back. I'm going to push it back towards the mountain, so that direction. I'm going to push it back towards the mountain, and I am going to move it in the up direction in this case. So, on my controller in the up direction towards the mountain, and I am going to start there, and I might rotate it kind of around like this. I'm going to rotate it like that. The truth of it is, this is the Z direction. The pointing, these lasers point in the positive Z direction. And the thumb on the left hand points in the positive X direction. And what really is happening that I can see is that, I believe, if I'm correct about this, this panel is a little bit up in the Y dimension. I want it to move forward in the Z dimension and negative in the Y dimension. So let's keep those in mind and see if we have what we need informationally. So let's take a look. You can kind of see it here. So if we look at the UI panel hand attached, it needs, in my opinion, to move in the positive in the Z. That's exactly what we want. That's exactly what I wanted right there. Positive in the Z and negative in the Y, meaning I want it to come down closer to the laser. We'll go even more in the Z. And I wanted it to kind of rotate around, which in this case I believe is rotating around the Z axis. And I kind of want it to rotate around here, and I want it to be kind of out then in the X, a bit more positive in the X, just a touch. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Awesome. I really do like this. It's also, if I'm going to hold my hand out, I have to hold my hand kind of a little bit too much up. So I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to rotate it back towards me, like this direction, coming back towards me. So let's see, what is that rotation entail? So I believe that rotation that I want is, I could actually do it by hand here using local transform. So if I select the UI panel and hit local transform frame, I can actually kind of get there. Awesome. It's perfect. It could maybe be rotated back, but those are some of the ideas. Just to remember, if you're placing something kind of on your hand, that the Z direction is the direction of the laser. So now screen right is the positive Z direction of that. So anything that lives underneath the hand of the VR hand, you know, if you want it to move out the laser, it needs to move in the positive Z direction. When you're pointing the laser and you hold the controller like level to the ground and kind of like your index is pointing directly away from you, out at the wall, out at the mountains, right, off into the horizon, and your thumb technically points up. And this is the left hand. You know, your ring finger coming across is pointing to the positive X direction. So there you go. So if you want something to move kind of out the laser, out towards the horizon, put it in the positive Z direction. If you want it to kind of come up in the air in this perspective, it needs to move in the positive Y direction. And then X is sort of right, positive, and negative to the left. And then rotating about those axes as well. So I rotated around the Z-axis to get the thing kind of tipping towards me left to right, and then tipping around its X-axis brings it, which is what I did there at the end. We'll go see it. The X-axis tip on this UI panel, hand attached, a little bit of X and a little bit of Y, kind of working with those. You can get the thing positioned how you want it. So that's how you could get one, get something hand attached, and then the help text is relatively small, but you could, you know, fine tune your scale, the scale of this object now. But I now have kind of a basic panel. In kind of 3 different forms. I will show you one other form, since you could imagine, one could imagine it. Basically, if you had something body locked, and it's fun to make, you know, I mean, we can animate kind of the way that these things move, or figure out different, you know, solutions for these. But so I'm going to put this panel connecting to the rig itself. So we'll call this UI panel. One of the terms that we use in VR is body locked. And so this UI panel will go as a child of the VR rig, not the hand. And then I'm going to move it into a relative position, someplace relative to the VR rig, and we'll see what it looks like. Way too close. The UI panel, body locked. Move it over here and out that way. Okay, yeah, that's actually perfect. So you can see I've got this, I now have this, the menu kind of floating with me, and I could actually make it translucent or something, which would be kind of cool. Let's do that. So the UI panel body locked. I'm going to make a new material, and I'm going to take a look at this material. I'm going to make it like gray, and I'm going to make its translucency like partial. And just for fun, just to add something to it, let's take the title and extrude it a little bit. So we'll go to text shape, we'll go to extrusion depth, and extrude it out a little. So that actually like makes the word itself kind of volumetric. So now let's take a look at what we see here. And that we could do for all of them also, by the way. Using a material, setting its translucency or its opacity, right, to a certain level, could be really nice for these panels. And so now I've got panels on panels on panels. I can press them in any combination. Oh, it threw an error. And what did I do? I didn't finish my work. And I apologize for that. So I cloned this, but I didn't come back over and reclone this. So this one still has our UI panel, the movable one, our red one. We never added that little relative find my parent code. So so basically what happens is it throws an error. It's looking for, it says I don't know what help text is. It says runtime error, attempt to index a global help text. It's a nil value. It's trying to find help text, because help text goes help text equals, and it doesn't equal anything because I didn't write it in here. I can actually write it now, which is help text equals, what was it, self get parent node colon find node by name, open close parenthesis, open close quotes, get in the middle of the quotes, HELP TEXT. That should do it. And that will find our, that'll find the help text that's in our, that's the child of our parent. So it finds our sibling, and now we're good. So, cool. So, numerous types. We've got the grabbable, the movable, wherever we want it. We've got body locked. We've got hand locked. We could even do head locked. My goodness. Head locked is a little obnoxious, but let's just take a look at what it looks like. We'll just use the body locked one and put it on the we'll put the body locked one on the instead of being on the VR rig itself. We'll put it as a child of the HMD camera. So right now it's a sibling with the HMD camera. It rides along with our general position. You know, another way of thinking about this is sort of physically, it's not really locked to our body. Another way of thinking about that is like room locked. But anyway, to be determined what you want to call that. Anyway, so I'm just going to put it under the HMD camera and check this out. It is a little too far to my right to be of any use. I'm also going to get you a full view here. We'll go to the HMD camera and we're going to add a new screen display so you can see monoscopically what's going on. The UI panel needs to be moved. Let's bring it over, see if that does it. You won't see it translucently, but I do. Yeah, it's not my favorite kind of interface design. It just looks, I mean, it might be cool for like a heads-up display to like see other data, but as a button interface, it's a little strange. And then, you know, to get more advanced from here, you've got this whole suite of options here for UI panels and stuff like that. But like, things you might do to advance it is like bring in different, JPEGs, rounded corner things that light up. You could make the edges of items glow. You could put borders on things. You could bring in, more sophisticated imagery and textures that are on these things. Better fonts and artwork and so on and so forth. Extruding, as we did up here. Putting some depth so that when the panel's viewed from here. There's one last thing, and let me see if I can make this work. That I would say I'm gonna get this UI panel off the HMD camera and just drag it to the side, and it's still back based on the VR rig. What I want to do is, if I fly through the world, what if I want this billboard to look at me? And that can be really useful. I think if I go to under the UI game and I go look at, and I select the UI panel, and then I select the HMD camera. No. I'd have to do something else here. I drew this plane in the wrong direction. But if you draw a plane like this, if you find the grid, let's come back to the grid, and I'll show you how you want to draw this. If you draw a box like that, or a plane like this, basically if I take this guy and make its remove its rigid body, or make its rigid body inactive, I can use a script under the UI game called look at, this little interaction, and make it look at, and you select the looking node, the thing that looks at something, and the thing that you have it look at, so that I'll fly over to this box and you'll see that it constantly looks at me. We did a whole thing on this around Halloween. So if you want a billboard that constantly kind of faces you no matter where you go, that's a really nice way to do it. And the way that you need to think of that is that the forward direction, the Z direction, is the direction. I didn't draw that plane to begin with in that way. So you would want to, I drew it flat on the ground, so it's trying to point. I could do this. Let me see if I can make this one work. If I flip it around, get rid of its look at now. If I flip it around and make it face forward in the Z axis, which is out that way, and then I'm going to rotate it like so. Actually, I'm going to face it straight up and down, which could be done. I'll do it by number here. Transform. On the rotation, I'll make this 90, and then negative 180 is interesting. I wanted to be negative 90. It's funny, okay. So if this faces forward in the Z axis, and I'll put it under another node. I'll go Entities, Node, place it here. I'm going to place this UI panel underneath that node. I'm going to center the UI panel. Excuse me. The UI panel should be a child of the node. Then it should be centered. Then the node itself can be brought into the pivot point location you want it. Then you can go to the look at, click on the look at, and the first item you pick when you're selecting look at works like this. The way that it works is, you're going to click UI game, you're going to hit look at. The first one is pick the looking node. Pick the looking node. Then you're going to pick the node you want it to look at, and then you're going to select the HMD camera, which is right there or right here. And so that's the item that it should look at. So now, if I want my menu, I don't see it. I must be doing this slightly wrong. I'm not sure why that just put it there. Oh, I'm sorry. You pick the UI game, you hit look at, and you need to put it on, click on that node that we buried our panel under, and then to the HMD camera. There you go. That look at, you want that node to basically be the container of whatever geometry you've drawn in the ahead of time. You then need to face your panel. You need to rotate it and face it in the Z direction, so that its face is looking out in the Z direction. It's going to then try to stick. Then when you bury it under the node is going to rotate so that its nose or its pointing face forward is going to rotate around until it faces you, no matter where you are, above it, beside it, or around it. And so you need to be looking at the relative forward direction of your panel. So you need to put the panel, rotate it to the positive, so its face goes into the positive Z direction, and then child it to a node, and then make that, use the interaction look at node to make that node look at your VR headset to the HMD camera. Kind of slightly advanced work, but sometimes it's just repairing little things you didn't intend in the beginning. But the ultimate effect is the look at effect is really fairly nice. You can see that this camera wants to, this billboard menu option is very much saying, hey, come engage with me. And that you could also be using here on your hand. That might be helpful to have it looking at you as well. So one of the things you may want to do if it makes life easier is build your menu facing forward to begin with, that your plane is drawn in a vertical position. Let me show you how you can draw a plane in a vertical position. So if you go to entities and you go to plane, if you draw, what you'd do is you'd kind of figure out where Z is. So this is the nose or the face of your thing. What I drew over here, let me delete that. That was a box. I'm going to go to plane, entities, plane. I'm going to draw, like, my first click and drag is going to draw super thin, like a line. And if I do a line, it's going to, Symmetry knows, oh, we're now trying to go in the vertical dimension. So now I've drawn the plane in such a way that it is naturally facing forward in the Z dimension. and the button interface should be on this if you want it to be a look at. If you want it to look at you. So to make it look at me, I need to fix the rigid body either by turning one of these true or false. And then I need to click interactions, and then I need to click, or sorry, not interactions, excuse me, UI game, look at, click this plane entity, then click the HMD camera, and then I'll fly over there. Maybe I made a mistake here. Oh, I thought that would work. I'm sorry, strike it out a couple times here. Really thought that works. Draw it like such. Well, ignore that. You can draw it. You can draw the plane entity facing forward, work on it, take it. You're going to fix its rigid body somehow. Grab a node. You can draw the node directly in the center of the object. Take the plane entity, drag it under the node. Now make the node UI game. Look at, select node, select HMD. So the same as I did last time. And that's the way that you're going to get a look at billboard looking at you. So I thought. Wow. I think we'll fix that today. I'm not sure what. Why I thought that. I've done that in the past. I don't know why that didn't seem to be what I was expecting. But anyway, worked over here. You should before building your button, if you want it to look at you, get the draw the plane flat, put it under a node, and have the node look at the camera. So draw it not vertical the way I did. Draw it on the ground like so. Plane. Get rid of the rigid body or set it false or on either one. Put a node down. Child the plane to the node. And then UI game. Look at node 3. Then to the HMD. Is that not right? My goodness. know exactly what I think happened. One more time. I'm gonna nail it. Put down a node. And then draw a plane. Put the plane on the node. Rotate the plane vertical. Okay. Okay. That's it. That makes sense. The node needs to draw to the ground. Entities. Node on flat ground. Entities. Plane drawn above node. Remove rigid body. Rotate 90 degrees. No. Place under node. Rotate 90 degrees. Look at node. HMD. That makes sense. Node, place a node, flat on the ground, entities, plane. Thank you for enduring. That's the flow. You have to place the node. I'm gonna place the node. Node goes straight on the ground. plane draws straight on top. It's centered over the thing. Get rid of the rigid body or set its active to either of these to false. Then you can rotate the plane. You can lift the entire thing up and now put the plane underneath the node. And then UI game, look at, you want to select the node, not the plane, and then select the HMD camera. There. Sorry, that took a little bit. Okay. Catch you next time.